Just crack him and he would just fire back at you, and he knocked a lot of people out just because he could take a shot so well.
Back when Chuck Liddell was at his peak, the guy looked absolutely unbeatable, but that dominance came at a brutal price. Chuck had built his entire fighting approach around eating punches and dishing them back even harder, banking on that iron jaw to carry him through every war.
He shouldn't be fighting. He shouldn't be fighting. At 50, he clearly can't take a punch anymore.
The warning signs were there long before anyone wanted to admit it. People could see the toll adding up with each brutal exchange.
Somebody was picking on you, bullying you, maybe even hitting you, and you stood there with your hands by your side, your fist balled up, your hands by your side, and the daycare teacher was like, "Why are you not fighting back?"
Well, my mom told me I wasn't allowed to fight. I wasn't allowed to hit anybody, so, I wouldn't do it. I mean, as my mom said I can't, so I guess I'll just sit here and take it. But and it happened a few times, and he finally called my mom and talked to her and said, "You got to let him defend himself. We can't be there every time something's happening." And he's just letting him. And I was like, okay, So she took me to my grandfather and had him teach me some straight punches and started throwing punches. And as far as defending myself, the rest is history.
So when news started circulating about Chuck potentially suffering from serious brain trauma, it didn't catch anyone off guard. This was always where his relentless fighting style was heading. Here's the complete story of how one of MMA's most legendary knockout artists pushed his body and mind beyond their breaking point, then kept pushing anyway.
It was Koi-Kon Karate Do was my first style. I was black belt. I won our nationals for our style.
Charles David Liddell entered the world on December 17, 1969, in Santa Barbara, California. Raised primarily by his mother and grandparents, after his father left the picture, Chuck got his first taste of combat sports from his grandfather's boxing lessons.
People probably don't have any idea that you have a business degree.
I wanted to get a PE degree, but my grandma didn't believe that was a real major. So I had to pick a major when I was a freshman. I picked accounting. I was good at it.
Outside of organized sports, however, he developed a reputation for toughness in a different way. Liddell often found himself involved in street fights, where his size, strength, and early martial arts training set him apart from his peers.
I used to even say in high school, I used to say, man, it sucks. Well, the thing I'm really good at, I can't make money doing. And I was talking about street fighting. I was going to Cal Poly at the time. I was like 19, I think. One of the resident wrestling practices goes to me, by any chance, did you jump off a car and kick a guy in the head? Yeah. How do you know?
Did you lose any fights in high school? Was there anybody you fought that somebody caught you? Or did you ever none? So you don't remember ever?
When Chuck turned 12, he dove into Koi-Kon karate training. The discipline meant so much to him that he eventually had those very words permanently inked across his scalp as a permanent tribute to where it all began.
I got called into an old karate school. And they called me in because they had a black belt coming in to spar. I came in and it was John.
So I get there and the guy goes, "Oh yeah, well, I can't really fight you, so you're going to go with one of my students." There it was Chuck, and I was like, okay, all right, I'm going to go. I gave my card before I left and just said, if you ever really want to learn, the sport part of it or whatever, and give me a call. And
so I called him up and I'm like, hey, he's like, yeah, come on up, let's go, let's train.
Chuck's natural athleticism earned him a spot on the wrestling team at California Polytechnic State University, where he competed at the Division I level. He walked away in 1995 with his business accounting degree, though he'd originally wanted to study physical education until his grandmother convinced him that wasn't a serious career path.
How did you get your nickname?
My trainer, John Hackman, gave it to me. I think it was like my third or fourth kickboxing fight. He came looking for me, couldn't find me. He finally found me, I was sleeping. He's like, "You don't get nervous before every fight?" No. They started calling me Iceman because I don't get nervous before fights.
He was the Iceman. I've never seen him lose his cool.
Despite his success, the sport offered little financial security at the time, and he often struggled to make ends meet.
I was having a lot of fun, but I wasn't making any money. And the UFC had come along during that time, but no one knew how to get into it.
During this period, he even considered leaving combat sports altogether to find a steady job that could support him long term.
So I was close to going back and getting a real job. I graduated in accounting right around 97.
Before turning professional, Chuck dominated the amateur kickboxing scene with an impressive 22 record and 16 knockouts to his name. He captured 2 national amateur kickboxing titles during this period. This is also when he crossed paths with John Hackleman, a seasoned kickboxer who ran the Pit Gym in San Luis Obispo.
When did you meet Dana White? When did that connection happen?
Dana was actually managing, I think, Tito. And Wayne Harriman, who's friends with Tito and Dana, was a friend of mine and would see me train with Tito. And he actually told Dana, you might want to sign this guy. He might be better than Tito. So Dana signed me then. He was my manager. He's managing me and Tito.
Simultaneously?
Yeah.
Well, before the UFC, I managed both Chuck and Tito. So, I did have a relationship with both guys.
It was awesome. I traveled around for a long time trying to promote the sport. Did a lot of things trying to just get the sport out there.
Hackelman transformed everything for Chuck's career trajectory. He took Chuck's raw knockout power and molded it into the devastating striking system that would eventually make him a household name. Hackelman was also responsible for giving Chuck his legendary nickname.
I'm telling you, when Chuck Liddell was in his prime, he was one of the most terrifying fucking human beings that's ever walked the face of the earth.
Chuck stepped into the professional MMA world at UFC 17 in Mobile, Alabama, back in 19. His debut went the distance against Noe Hernandez, with Chuck taking the unanimous decision victory. Before reaching the big leagues, though, Chuck had connected with Dana White, who was managing fighters at the time.
It was in Tito's head big time because every time they trained together, Tito would get beat up. I'm talking drop him on the ground and Tito refusing to get back up. Chuck would want to hook up and spar and whatever, and Tito would never want to spar.
When we trained together, I took him down way more than he took me down.
No way.
But that's why he didn't want to fight me, because he couldn't out wrestle me. And then when we're striking, I used to drop him with body shots, and he never dropped me.
He never dropped you?
No, never.
Absolutely, positively would not fight Chuck because he knew he couldn't beat Chuck.
Chuck's UFC journey hit its first major roadblock early on. At UFC 19 in 1999, Jeremy Horn caught him in an arm triangle choke for the submission victory. That defeat would stand as his only time Chuck ever tapped out in his entire career. But Chuck bounced back hard with an incredible run of wins. From 2000 through 2002, he steamrolled through Paul Jones, Kevin Randleman, Murilo Bustamante, and Vitor Belfort. Then on May 27, 2001, he made history by becoming the first UFC fighter to step into the Pride ring, where he knocked out Guy Mezger in round 2 at Pride.
The other event got fucking huge, and then Chuck Liddell came out to the scene. And when Chuck Liddell was the champion, Chuck Liddell was so fucking terrifying.
Yeah.
He was this do or die berserker. He would just come at you, just swinging bombs, take one on the chin, knock dudes out. His fights were wild.
He didn't give a shit.
He was the real reason why the UFC became uber popular, because you would watch The Ultimate Fighter, and it was a wild fight, a great fight, but then you need a destroyer.
Right.
You need a destroyer, and that destroyer was Chuck Liddell. And for the run where he was at the top, where Chuck Liddell was just murking people.
So he was kind of like the Mike.
There was just one problem standing between Chuck and the title shot he deserved. Tito Ortiz held the belt and flat out refused to fight his former training partner, knowing exactly what kind of damage Chuck could inflict.
His fights when he knocked out Tito Ortiz, like, oh my God, he was a monster.
Right.
He was a monster.
I knew Chuck Liddell was going to win those fights. I knew he was. He had Tito's number. Tito couldn't deal with Chuck's style, his power, his wrestling. Tito couldn't take Chuck down. And Chuck was 1,000,000% in Tito's head.
It was Liddell's 4th consecutive title defense, and it emphatically reaffirmed his dominance over his rival.
By the end of
The UFC had to get creative, setting up an interim title fight between Chuck and Randy Couture at UFC 43 into Couture completely dismantled Chuck's game plan, using crisp straights and grinding clinch work to shut down Chuck's wild hooks. Randy got the takedowns he needed and finished Chuck with strikes. That same year, Chuck entered Pride's middleweight Grand Prix, blasting through Alistair Overeem in the opening round before Quinton Rampage Jackson stopped him in the semifinals. When Tito finally sorted out his contract issues, he immediately lost his belt to Randy Couture. That opened the door for the fight everyone wanted to see. Chuck versus Tito at UFC 47 in April 2004 delivered everything the hype promised. Chuck put Tito away in the second round with a devastating knockout. In early 2005, Chuck and Randy were chosen as opposing coaches for the very first season of The Ultimate Fighter. The show became a massive hit and changed everything for the sport. Then came April 16, 2005, at UFC 52, where Chuck got his revenge against Randy Couture knocking him out in round 1 to finally claim the UFC light heavyweight championship.
Rampage wasted little time in the rematch. He caught Liddell with a right hook in the first round, dropping him, and followed up with ground strikes to score a knockout just 1 minute 53 seconds into the fight. In a flash, Chuck Liddell's reign as champion was over.
Left hook to the bottom.
It was a stunning defeat, the first knockout loss of Liddell's UFC career, and it marked a turning point.
Chuck, you've been the most dominant light heavyweight champion in the history of the UFC.
Michael Jordan took basketball to new heights, and Chuck did the same thing for mixed martial arts during his championship reign. Between 2005 and 2007, Chuck defended his title 4 straight times against Jeremy Horn, Randy Couture in their rubber match, Renato Sobral, and Tito Ortiz in their highly anticipated rematch. That second Ortiz fight at UFC 66 shattered every financial record the UFC had set up to that point. Chuck even fought through a torn MCL, but still managed to stop Tito in the 3rd round.
When Chuck was young, he was known for having like a granite chin.
Yeah.
You could just crack him and he would just fire back at you, and he knocked a lot of people out just because he could take a shot so well. And then one day, it just stopped working.
By 2006, Chuck had basically cleaned out his entire division. He became the face of the UFC brand, that mohawk hairstyle, the tattooed skull. Those iconic knockout celebrations, everything about Chuck screamed superstar. He put together 7 straight knockouts, a record that still stands today.
Yeah, and then the knockouts came, like Rampage KO'd him, and then other people were KOing him, and then it just got to a point where it's just like one good punch and you would just go out. It's like your brain knows you're so tough, and it's like, hey, we got to protect this guy. He's stupid. He's going to keep getting hit, so let's just shut off.
But every champion's reign eventually comes to an end. Chuck's downfall began on May 26, 2007, at UFC 71. He put his belt on the line against Quinton Rampage Jackson, the same fighter who had knocked him out in Japan 4 years earlier. This time, the stakes couldn't have been higher, with UFC gold hanging in the balance.
Yeah. When I got to the weigh-in and we did the face-off, for me, I was like, oh, man, Chuck looks serious, because I watched him so many times. That's when I really started to think man, I'm fighting Chuck Liddell. So that's when, for me, the nerve started. And then I hit up Randy Couture, who just happened to be a floor below me, and I go and see Randy, and I'm like, oh, man, Randy, I'm scared, man. I'm scared. And Randy's like, what's going on? He's like, oh, man, I just can't shake this feeling, man. I'm just so nervous about tomorrow, and I don't want to get beat up and knocked down in front of everybody. And the best advice I ever got, he said, you got to make friends with the worst enemy. When you make friends with the worst enemy, you understand that life will go on. And then I worked myself up into a lather just thinking about it, yeah, I got to face my fears. I got to face my worst enemy.
Stories started floating around about Chuck hitting the Las Vegas nightclub scene during fight week. People questioned whether he was taking the fight seriously enough. Chuck brushed off the criticism, saying that's just how he always prepared for his Vegas fights. But the conversations about his dedication had started. 4 months later, Chuck was back in action against Keith Jardine. Most people felt he hadn't given his body enough time to recover properly. Jardine's unorthodox striking and punishing leg kicks earned him a controversial split decision win. Chuck had now lost 2 fights in a row.
It was crazy.
And he didn't get up.
It was such a flush shot.
The brutal loss was a sobering moment, and many observers thought it might be the end of the road for Chuck.
Because his style was so aggressive, that people could just set, boom, and counter, like Rashad Evans did with him. And so you're getting his momentum coming forward and the shot, and he would get flatlined.
December 2007 brought the Chuck vs. Wanderlei Silva showdown at UFC 79. You had 2 of the most violent strikers in the sport going at it for 15 minutes. Neither man disappointed the fans. They went to war for 3 complete rounds, with Chuck taking the unanimous decision in what many called 2007's Fight of the Year. Nobody knew it at the time, but this would be the last victory of Chuck's MMA career.
I care about him. I care about his health. And, it's over, man. We all turned 40. It's over. Listen, I've been pushing for retirement. He's my friend. I love him. I care about him. We sat down. We had a 2-hour talk. He wanted to do this. He fucking has nothing to prove. Nothing to prove. He doesn't have to prove anything to me, the rest of the world. He's got shitloads of money. There's no reason for it.
The damage from years of brutal wars was finally catching up with the Iceman by 2008. On September 6, 2008, Chuck faced Rashad Evans at UFC 88 in what would become one of the most shocking moments in UFC history.
Chuck told me before the season started, when I asked him to do it, he said, I guarantee you, Tito will not fight me. We'll do this show and he'll pull out of the fight, I guarantee it. And that's why when Tito pulled out, I was like, holy shit. Chuck was right, and, I had to go tell Chuck that Tito pulled out. Tito pulled out of the fight.
That fucking pussy. Don't let that guy fight anymore, man. He's a fucking
Rashad landed a perfect overhand right in the second round that sent Chuck crashing to the canvas, completely unconscious. It was one of the most devastating knockouts anyone had ever seen.
Chuck Liddell came in. He worked hard for this thing, and, I think him and Rich Franklin tonight fought the type of fights that made them both famous and made them both world champions tonight. Those two went at it. He means a lot to this company, and he means a lot to the sport. He means a lot to me personally. He was a great champion. He was a great business partner. He's always going to have a home with the UFC. He gave it his last shot. You know what? He went out like Chuck Liddell would. Came out blasting, bombing, tried to put Rich away in the slugfest. And he gave the fans a good last fight with the Iceman.
Chuck came back in April 2009 to face Mauricio Shogun Rua at UFC 97. Shogun put Chuck away with strikes in the very first round, marking Chuck's second straight knockout loss. After this defeat, Dana White started publicly questioning whether it was time for Chuck to hang up the gloves.
People asked me for a long time why I stuck around so long. I'm like, if I was getting my ass kicked and then getting knocked out, it would have been a lot easier to hang it up. I was getting paid really well, and I was winning fights and then just getting caught. So you always think, oh man, I can fix that. We had a dinner together. I said, look, man, I can't figure out why this happened. I can't compete the way I used to. So, I'm done.
And I'm here today with my partner, Lorenzo Fertitta, to announce his retirement. Myself, my partners owe a lot to Chuck Liddell. And we're also here today to announce that he is becoming one of the top executives in the UFC. Chuck Liddell is now the new Executive Vice President of Business Development.
They agreed on one final fight to close out Chuck's legendary career. The plan was to run it back with Tito Ortiz after they coached against each other on Season 11 of The Ultimate Fighter. But Tito had to pull out with an injury.
And Chuck Liddell and Tito are fighting, so what else you got?
Ooh, what do you think of that?
Not my cup of tea, but,
You're going to watch it.
For sure. Well,
I'm going to watch it.
Yeah, we'll watch it. We might do a fight companion for it.
Some people say it shouldn't happen. Right?
Oh, no. I don't think it shouldn't happen. I look at it more like I think if Chuck Liddell was still employee of the UFC getting paid $400,000 just to chill or whatever he was doing for the UFC, he would not be fighting. I think it's more of a money play, which bums me out. Because I think Chuck Liddell and Tito Ortiz, what they did for the sport, should be compensated for the rest of their lives. It bums me out they have to fight to make money. That bums me out.
Chuck's farewell fight came against Rich Franklin at UFC 1115 in June 2010. Once again, Chuck was knocked out, this time at the end of the first round. It marked his third knockout defeat and a heartbreaking end to one of the greatest careers in MMA history.
Can't be fighting. He shouldn't be fighting at 50. He clearly can't take a punch anymore.
On July 10th, 2009, Chuck was inducted into the UFC Hall of Fame Pioneer Wing. Then on December 29th, 2018, he officially announced his retirement at the UFC 21. The UFC immediately hired him as vice president of business development in what was supposed to be a lifetime position with the company.
He just felt like he always had Tito's number. But this is the problem, is like Tito wins now. When it all said and done, Tito KO'd him. And he KO'd him more soundly than Chuck ever KO'd Tito. Yeah, Tito put Chuck out. He put him out. You're dealing with a guy whose brains are, it's just, he's been scrambled too many times.
He didn't immediately make a retirement speech in the cage, but the consensus in the MMA community was that this would be the end. And in March 2020, Chuck Liddell confirmed he had retired from MMA competition again, this time for good.
Everything changed in 2016 when new ownership bought the UFC for $4 billion. The entire company structure got overhauled during the transition. Chuck, along with fellow Hall of Famer Matt Hughes, lost his executive position in the restructuring. His so-called lifetime job had come to an end.
He has been saying that he misses it. It was his favorite thing.
Yeah, I miss playing baseball.
He misses it.
To me, it's more of a sad story.
See, I think Tito, he might actually want this fight just to fight Chuck again.
On November 24th, 2018, Chuck Liddell and Tito Ortiz stepped into the cage one last time.
In 2018, at 48 years old, Chuck shocked the combat sports world by announcing his return to competition. He wanted to settle things once and for all with Tito Ortiz in their trilogy fight. The bout wouldn't happen under the UFC banner, though. Instead, Oscar De La Hoya's Golden Boy Promotions would promote the event.
All done the right way at the right time.
I don't have any regrets. You know, I had a great time. I mean, it was fun. I got paid a lot of money to do what I love for a living, and my body held together pretty dang well.
Dana White came out strongly against the fight. He called the California State Athletic Commission's decision to approve it absolutely disgusting. Dana argued that he had retired Chuck in 2010 specifically to protect his long-term health and brain function. November 24, 2018, arrived, and Chuck and Tito stepped into the cage one final time at the Forum in Inglewood, California. The fight ended quickly and brutally. Tito knocked Chuck out with punches at 4:24 of the first round. It was Chuck's 7th career knockout loss and his 4th straight knockout defeat dating back to the California State Athletic Commission hit Chuck with an indefinite medical suspension that effectively banned him from competing anywhere in the United States. The Guardian newspaper called the entire event a repugnant spectacle. Critics everywhere argued that allowing Chuck to fight again was unnecessarily exposing him to potentially life-threatening brain trauma. In March 2020, Chuck confirmed that he had permanently retired from MMA competition, but the real consequences were just beginning. The damage Chuck accumulated during his fighting career didn't magically disappear when he stopped competing. The effects followed him into retirement in devastating ways. On October 11, 2021, Los Angeles County sheriffs got called to Chuck's Hidden Hills home for a domestic disturbance. A verbal argument between Chuck and his wife Heidi Northcott had escalated into physical pushing and shoving. Their daughter witnessed the whole incident, but couldn't tell officers who had started the altercation. Chuck had a small red mark on his cheek and another mark near his chest. Heidi didn't show any visible injuries. Chuck was arrested on misdemeanor domestic battery charges. He got booked at the Malibu Lost Hills Sheriff's Station and released after posting $20,000 bail. Just hours after getting out, Chuck posted a statement on Instagram claiming he was actually the victim of the incident. He said deputies told him his wife would be arrested since he hadn't fought back against her assault, and that he volunteered to go in her place to shield the family from public scrutiny. Chuck said this was part of a pattern where he tried to hide his wife's mental health issues out of love and loyalty, but that it was time for their relationship to end. On October 18th, the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office decided not to file charges against either party, citing insufficient evidence. They classified it as a cross-complaint, since both parties accused the other of being the aggressor. Just 4 days after the incident, Chuck filed for divorce. They'd been together since around 2009 and had 2 children together. The divorce proceedings would drag on for nearly 4 years. In September 2022, court documents from their custody evaluation revealed deeply troubling allegations from Heidi Northcott. She claimed Chuck was showing clear signs of chronic traumatic encephalopathy, the degenerative brain condition linked to repeated head trauma. According to court filings reported by The Blast, she stated that he's been knocked out many times and has CTE. She said he can't remember things and gets stuck on his speech, and that he's going to develop dementia or Alzheimer's disease. She also mentioned his terrible sleep apnea. Northcott made additional claims about Chuck's mental health, describing depression, paranoia, impulsive behavior, and a pattern of escaping through drugs and alcohol. She alleged his behavior had become increasingly unpredictable and violent. While CTE can only be definitively diagnosed through post-mortem brain examination, Chuck's career provided plenty of reasons for concern. He'd been knocked out 7 times during his career, with 4 of those coming consecutively in his final 5 fights. His aggressive stand-and-bang fighting style meant absorbing tremendous punishment to land his own shots. Years of hard sparring sessions added even more damage to the total. Concerns about Chuck's brain health actually went back much further than the 2022 allegations. As early as 2012, journalists had noted slurred speech and word searching during interviews. A 2007 television appearance on Good Morning Texas showed him appearing drowsy, slurring his words, and actually dozing off during the interview. The Nevada State Athletic Commission required him to take a drug test before they'd sanction his next fight. He passed the test. Years later, Chuck explained he'd been sick, had partied the night before, and taken a large dose of Ambien. The effects lasted much longer than expected, and he couldn't even remember traveling from Texas back to California. The custody evaluation ultimately recommended that Chuck and his ex-wife share joint custody of their Theron. The court ordered random drug testing for both parents. The divorce finally wrapped up in April 2025, with terms that included joint legal and physical custody. Chuck agreed to pay $5,000 monthly in child support, establish a $700,000 education fund, and cover all medical expenses and extracurricular activity. Heidi received a one-time spousal support payment of $77,000. Chuck's attorney, Juliana Loyola, issued a statement saying that after fighting off numerous false allegations against Chuck, the parties reached a divorce settlement outside of court. She emphasized that Chuck is a great father who has always put his children first and will continue to do so. By October 2025, Chuck had remarried. He wed Heidi Ray in Las Vegas and started a new chapter of his life. Chuck has taken proactive steps to address his brain health concerns. In 2024, he traveled to BioAccelerator in Colombia for stem cell treatments designed to reduce joint inflammation, potentially prevent CTE onset, and extend longevity. The facility conducts clinical trials specifically focused on concussion syndrome and CTE research. Chuck's situation isn't unique in the combat sports world. It highlights major systemic problems in MMA. Unlike the NFL or professional boxing, MMA has no fighters' union or pension system. Retired fighters often struggle with physical and financial problems without union-backed healthcare or retirement benefits. Many end up turning to crowdfunding campaigns or completely unrelated jobs just to survive. The Guardian has extensively covered the struggles of former fighters and the lack of adequate protections against exploitative comeback fights, driven purely by financial desperation. Chuck also got hit hard financially through a 2007 real estate fraud scheme. He invested in properties with developer Kelly Gearhart, who later pleaded guilty to wire fraud and money laundering charges. The escrow officer improperly released Chuck's funds and allegedly forged signatures. Chuck never received the properties he'd paid for. In 2015, Chuck won nearly $2 million in damages from the case. Despite all the challenges and controversies, Chuck's legacy as an MMA pioneer remains secure. He stays active through podcasts, promotional events, and UFC appearances. In recent 2025 interviews, he's praised modern fighters like Alex Pereira as real fighters who embody the spirit of the sport. Chuck's story serves as both an inspiration and a cautionary tale. He helped transform MMA from a niche spectacle into the global phenomenon it is today. He drew millions of fans to events and inspired an entire generation of fighters to pursue their dreams. But his aggressive, chin-first fighting style came with devastating long-term consequences that continue to affect his daily life. As of 2026, at 56 years old, Chuck continues dealing with ongoing health challenges. His ex-wife's allegations about CTE remain medically unconfirmed, but they align with patterns documented in other combat sports athletes. Memory problems, speech difficulties, sleep apnea, mood swings, all of these issues are commonly seen in fighters who absorb significant head trauma during their careers. The real question moving forward is whether Chuck's body has held up as well as he believes it has, and more importantly, whether his brain has weathered the storm of his fighting career. Only time will tell the full extent of what those wars in the octagon ultimately cost him.